Good evening, everyone. I'm Kyle from BF Light Shows and RGB Sequences, and we're going to do a class on moving heads. In this presentation, I'm going to go over setting up the model. We are going to also go over setting up the groups, and then I'm going to do a short little demonstration on how they move around and that type of thing. And then I'm also going to go over some tips and tricks on how to import and get the most out of both of the sequences. So if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask away, and I will do my best to answer them. But from here, let's dig in. So what we're going to do is go into the layout, and some of this may change once Gil comes out with that new moving head model. So I may have to do a new presentation once that comes out. But for now, go over to your layout, click on the DMX effect, or I'm sorry, the DMX prop. And I like to use the moving head 3D model. Go ahead and you can drag that out. And with the 3D model, it will show you on screen a good representation of the pan, which is tilt or moving left and right, as well as the tilt, which is kind of up and down. You can also now use the color wheel, which will show you if you are setting any colors on the moving head. So the moving heads we are using are from Your Pixel Store. They are the indoor 230 watt model. So I'm going to change this to MH1 just for moving head number 1. They are 16 channels. And if you pull up the manual, so this is the manual for the moving heads that he offers, it will show you a color wheel. That will be helpful later when we go through and actually set up the color wheel. But it will also show you your channel information. So in here, it says 9 channel, but that's just basically showing you number 9 in the menu. It is going over channels, but you see channel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16. So this will give you all the information that you need on how to set them up. The real important ones you want to pay attention to if you're doing a color wheel, channel 1 is the color in this one. The next is shutter. You also want to look for your dimmer, your pan, your tilt, and you want to know about the lamp function. So this moving head, like I said, it has 16 channels. We are going to leave the body unhidden for now. It uses a pan channel of 10. The pan orientation is fine. That basically just means which direction it's facing. The pan degree of rot is rotation. Most moving heads are 540 degrees, so they can do a full circle plus a 180. The pan and slew limit basically defines in X lights how fast the moving head can spin around or change in tilt. And if you don't set this, the moving head's going to move a lot faster on screen than it will in person. So as a sequencer, if we didn't have that set, leave it at 0, we may be able to make an effect go faster than the actual moving head could keep up with. So when you go to import it and play it on your house, it wouldn't look right. So we like to set that, kind of slow it down, make sure that it would work in real life the way we see it on screen. Tilt channel, manual says that that is 12, and they face kind of down and to the right once they're set up. As you can kind of see behind me, they're pointed down. So this is just kind of a rough estimation where they point over here. The tilt degree of rotation, they can rotate 270 degrees. Same thing, we're going to do a degree slew limit of 150. And color type, if you want to use the color wheel, X-Lights will show you the color that the moving head is set to. You would have to change this to color wheel. If you don't care what X-Lights is showing, you can leave it as RGBW, and you can use a color value in the color, or I'm sorry, a DMX value on the color group, and you can set the color even without having this as a color wheel. Just to go over how to do this, I'll set up color wheel, and then what we would do is basically just check, give me just 1 second. So you would check the manual. and it should have all of your colors and what the values need to be set for. So I did this for the RGB sequence store. So color number 1 is white, and it has a value of 1. So if I set a DMX effect on channel 1 with a value of 1, I'm going to get the color white. If I do that as a value of 10, it's going to go to red. And because it's a wheel, it literally moves around inside the moving head. So you won't be able to go, red, green, blue. There's an orange in here, as you can see. So it would go red, orange, blue, green. So you got to be careful of that. You have to, take some consideration. If you're going to use color, you should turn off the dimmer, let it rotate, unless you want to see it do the color change. So we'll get that out of the way, and we'll get that set up real quick.
Excuse me.
Sure.
Is there any representation for a Gobo effect? And if not, or what would you do to be able to try to be able to incorporate that other than just shooting it in the room and looking at it? Is there something that you do currently to deal with that?
To the best of my knowledge, there isn't a way for exploits to display a Gobo. The way I haven't really played with Gobo too much, but the way I've learned about it is to use the group method with the strings, and that'll give you kind of like a blinking light type of indication that you have data on the Gobo. And I'll show you how to set that up in a few minutes. But it won't actually give you a representation of, hey, I'm using like a star Gobo or a snowflake or, whatever the actual.
You're just mapping a color to the DMX channel, basically, right?
Right. Yep. So basically, I get a blinking light or a solid light, whatever, that tells me there's an effect on Gobo, but I don't actually know what it looks like unless I have it set up. Or I just don't think Xlights has the capability of that, or at least not yet. Maybe that'll be something Gil adds when he makes that updated model.
Cool.
All right. So, color wheel size, that is basically where you define how many colors your color wheel has. So this one, it is 11. And then by default, it'll collapse itself. So just uncollapse it, and then you'll have to run through here and set these up. So I'm just going to do the first couple. So we have white, red is 10. So I'm just going to do the first 5 for right now, just so we can do a couple colors, but I won't take all the time to do that. And then we are also going to go through the last couple of things. We need to set the shutter. In this case, the shutter is channel 2. And then you can set the shutter threshold if you want. I leave it at 1, and then you can change the beam width and length if you want. I don't really find that necessary, so I just leave that alone. And then the dimmer channel on these are 3. So the rest of this moving head should be set up correctly. So we'll save that. And then since we're going to demo a few of these, we'll do moving head 2. Oops. 3, 4. And if you set the first moving head up, you can copy and paste like I just did. And then you'll be able to copy over all that channel information. You won't have to fill that out each and every time. All right, so now we have our 4 moving heads. And now what we want to do is set up the groups that we would need. So what you can do is basically just take a string, and then we are going to do number of strings, which represents the number of moving heads you have. So in this case, there are 4 strings. There is 1 node per string to represent 1 moving head. So there are 4 dots, 4 moving heads. And then what you are going to do is put this onto a controller, or I'm sorry, put it onto a start channel. So use start channel, come over here where it says start channel, start of model, and then you're going to pick moving head 1. And then this is the dimmer. So you're going to set the start channel to 3. This correlates with whatever your dimmer channel is. So now it says at moving head 1:3, and then check the box for individual start channels, and it will basically do the same thing for the others. So now we want moving head 2. Oops. So now what this is telling you is node 1 is tied to moving head 1, channel 3. Node 2 is tied to moving head 2, channel 3. Node 3 is tied to moving head 3, channel 3. So anytime I put an effect on the dimmer group, it is going to control all of these. If I want to do something like a single strain or a bars effect, it will basically rotate through the 4 moving heads, or 8, or however many you have. And then we are going to basically repeat this process until we fill out all of the effects we would use on a regular basis. Those are going to be your pan, shutter, tilt, and possibly color. Those ones are probably the most common that I would recommend making. So next one, shutter. Come over to controller, start channel. Start of model. Oops. And then this is start channel number 2. Click the little box, it will fill that out. And depending on who you get your sequences from, this process may be a little bit different. A lot of the sequencers are starting to use this. Some of them still just sequence directly on the moving head itself, and you have to do channel remapping and that type of thing. I find that just being a little more tedious, so I like doing it on the group as opposed to on the actual moving head. When I've mapped our sequences for customers, it takes a lot longer to try to go through and remap all the channels and that type of thing, as opposed to if they have a group set up. So I prefer doing it this way. It seems to be a little easier to import and a better customer experience. If you take any of these groups, you could kind of reverse the process and take the effects from the group and put them on individual moving heads if you wanted, but that's a lot of extra effort. And then one other thing I wanted to cover is when you start setting up moving heads for the night, or your show is going to begin, it's recommended to start your show maybe a few minutes early with a lamp on sequence. And that can just be a simple animation, doesn't have to be anything crazy. And what that'll do is basically allow you to turn on the moving head. Because they use a bulb instead of a LED, they need time to arc and warm up. And every moving head will have its own parameters on how to set that. On ours, it is a value of 255 on channel 16 for 5 to 7 seconds. If you exceed the 5 to 7 seconds, that's fine. But if you only do a 1-2 second effect on the lamp on, it's not going to affect it. So it won't turn it on, but also it won't turn it off. The value on the off version, so if you need to turn the lamp off at the end of the night, it's 160, I believe. And same thing, you have to have that on for 5+ seconds. So usually I'll turn them on, run the sequence for a few minutes. I'm sorry, not a few minutes, about 30 seconds to a minute. And then I wait maybe 10 minutes before I actually start the show. So as the moving head is sitting there, it'll continue to get a little bit brighter, get to temperature, get to full brightness, and then the show will begin. So just one thing to keep in mind. If you have any questions on that, feel free to either ask here or send us a message afterwards. All right, so now we have our groups all set up. I'll do one other one for, actually, I'm not gonna do color yet. I'm gonna leave these like this for now. All right, so now what we need to do is assign them to the controller. So what you're gonna do is grab moving head 1. I have them daisy chained, so moving head 1, 2, 3, and 4. And you want to make sure that the channels are correct. So it's 16 channels, and this little square brackets means your DMX start address. So I'm starting at DMX address 1. Next fixture is 17, 33, and 49. You can ignore the groups that you set up for the moving heads because those are going to correlate with the channels that you set up. So you don't have to do anything with that. You can go ahead and upload input and output. We'll save this. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and turn them all on. When you first turn them on, they will start to do a self-check. Make sure that you don't have the locks on the pilt or the pan or the tilt. They have locks just for shipping and storage and things to make sure that they don't get damaged. But you'll see them, they'll start to spin around, and after a few seconds, they'll be ready for lamp on commands. So the way I usually do this is I will drop an DMX effect on the moving head fixture itself. And then in channel 16, set that to 255. Copy and paste that. Go ahead and just align all of them so they're the same. Go ahead and you can do a quick render on that since the channel's changed. And then as we do this, the moving heads will turn on. You won't see anything, but when you actually have them, right here, there is a little kind of a slotted area that you can see that the light will kick on. So they should all be on now. We'll give this just another few seconds just to make sure. And then what I would do is basically just delete these effects, and then you can start putting your own effects on there. All right, so all done with that. Now, if we want to drop a DMX effect on the pan, we can. And the way we set this up, if you double click on pan, it will drop down to strand 1. And if you double click that, it will show you node 1, 2, 3, and 4. Node 1, 2, 3, and 4 represent moving head 1, 2, 3, and 4. So you can do this a couple different ways. You can come onto the DMX effect here and use channel 1. And as I move this around, you can see moving head number 1 is moving. Probably a little better if I use the other ones. I'm blocking the first one. So you can see that they are moving around. As you play with these. Actually, 3 and 4 are not moving. 1 second.
Hey,
I'm
Kyle,
sorry.
I don't think 3 and 4 is moving in your model layout or house preview either.
It's actually 1 and 2 that aren't moving. All right. So something with that group is not happy. Come back to that in just a minute. Okay. So to get them to turn on, basically we would turn a shutter value on. So to do that, we can basically just drag an on effect. All right. Hang on just 1 second because something's not right here. So dimmer is 2, shutter is 3. Shutter is 3. Dimmer is 2. Dimmer is 2. Oh, I know what I did. All right. One other critical part I forgot to double check is when you set up the groups over here, you have to come down to the string properties, and this RGB nodes needs to be single color. So if you don't have that set as single color, it will do all kinds of weird things on you. All right, so most of your sequences, you are going to have just an on effect or a DMX value with 255 across the shutter the entire time. And then when you want the lights to turn on, you can have a dimmer. So what I'll do is basically throw a few different effects on DMX. If I do a value of 43, they should be facing us. And then if we do something on the tilts, let's say like 90, they'll be kind of pointed towards the sky. And then if we want them to kind of go left to right, we could throw a single strand on here if we wanted to. Maybe do 5 cycles and do like a bounce left to right. Let's make that a little faster. So as you can see, the single strand is controlling the dimmers, which is causing them to go left to right. If we wanted the moving head to kind of bounce and dance, we'd come over to tilt and we could throw a value curve on this. So we could come over here, we could do like ramp up and down. And if we wanted to just reverse the moving head 3 and 4, so they're opposite 1 and 2, we can. So now let's slow that down. So now moving head 1 and 2 are going kind of at a different angle than 1 and 3 and 4. And you could control that speed by how long this effect lasts. So now they're moving quicker. If you wanted to do kind of the same thing with pan, you could do just like a pan, let's say 43.6. So now you can see, whoops, those effects aren't the same way. So now you can see that they are rotating around, they are tilting up and down, and really it's up to you how you want them to look, and you'd be able to sequence them this way. This doesn't look super great. So what I would normally do is try to come up with an idea of what I want them to do. Say I want them to start to slowly stagger, kind of going up on an angle. Kill the dimmer real quick. You can use a bars effect, you can use on, you can use the DMX effect. Really, there's quite a few ways you can do this, and there's no right or wrong way really to do it. Probably wouldn't work for a shader, but short of that, a lot of the effects in here will give you some interesting results. So on pan, if I wanted them to start facing the left and go to the right, my left, your right, we could go from a ramp of 0 to a ramp of 86. 86 on these is totally the opposite direction. So it's a, and you can play with the different value curve options here. You could set this as a sine wave. You could set this as a sawtooth, you know, really whatever you want. I use ramps and ramp up and down pretty often. We get a lot of good effects with those. You can also play with the value of the brightness. So instead of doing this on the DMX effect here, you can go into the brightness setting and you can play with it in there as well. That'll also control how they work. All right, so now we have kind of a left to right motion. And then if we wanted something where they kind of start going upwards, grab another DMX effect. And for ours, 40 is a good value to not hit other neighbors' windows and things like that. So I usually like to start at 40. 128 is straight up and down. So we'll do 40 to 128. And then if we just throw, actually, I'm sorry, one other thing, moving heads need time to get into position. So if I want them to start at 0, that's fine. But if I want them to start at, say, 86, they would need time to get into position. I have the tilt set at 40. They're going to need a moment to get to that 40 position. So what we can do is just throw an effect here. So this will give them just a little bit of a buffer to get into position. So now what they should do is, starting at their starting position, they should rise up, come over, and then kind of do one of these types of things. And then,
Question there in chat.
sure.
Um,
Sorry, I can't see the chat. So whoever asked that, go ahead and let me see. One question.
He says one question. Oh, you got it?
Yeah, I got it now. So the question is, I found some sequences start their programming with different pan orientation configurations, 0, 90, etc. My moving heads are physically located with a pan orientation at 90. How can I correct a sequence that starts its programming from pan orientation at 0 and that the movements are correct? I currently do it by adding a DMX value in the bulk edit offset option. is this the correct way to do it? Is there another option? That's one way to do it. Right now, there isn't a good method. Most of the sequencers kind of do their own thing, and that creates lots of problems for customers. The bulk edit option is probably your quickest way to get there. You can also add, depending on what it is, you can add an additional value. So if you come over here and add another layer to pan, so let's set these, let's delete the on effect, delete these. So if you have your pan effect or your pan value, and I'm going to set this at 86, so it's starting at 180-degree angle. All right, so now they are all facing the opposite direction. If I wanted these to change direction by, say, 90 degrees, that would be a value of about 43. And so I added an additional layer on the pan. I set the value to 43 because that is approximately 90-degree difference. And then if you come over to the render or layer settings, rather, you can come over to render style. I'm sorry, not layer settings, layer blending. And then you could do subtractive. And what that'll do is it should subtract the 43 from the 86, but it's got to be that way. So to do subtractive, it would have to be above the layer as opposed to below. But now they're all pointing forward. So even though this effect wants them pointing to the left, this subtractive moves them back forward. So you could do something like that. And then, you know, say there is a, let's say 128. So that should throw the moving heads totally behind me. And then this subtractive value should keep them pointing to the side. And it does. So if I wanted to change this to 86, they will point at me. So I basically just rotated them 180 degrees. So your sequence person that you have the sequences from, they are starting 90-degree difference. You can either add or subtract a value of 43 to whatever their values are, and it will correct that. There may be some play in that depending on how they are using the effects and things like that, but that should get you pretty close in the ballpark without having to do a bulk edit on everything. All right. I'm going to also go over kind of importing, so I'll do that real quick. Does anybody have any other questions on the actual physical movements of moving heads or anything like that? No? All right. So to shut off the moving heads, same way we turn them on, drag an effect. And then for these, we are going to set a value of 160. And then as we run this, it will turn off the lamp. And then after a few minutes, you can go ahead and turn off the moving head, the actual fixture itself. You don't want to just turn the moving head off because it's kind of like a projector. They need time to warm up and shut down. All right, so that should be enough time for those to have turned off. You will kill that. There's another question, looks like. Adaptive would work well if the example sequence value is still shining in your neighbor's window. You could do an additive of 4 or 5 to get them high enough. The challenge with that is when they rotate back to the side, you have neighbors over there as well. Yeah, good point, Bill. You can use additive or subtractive for tilt and pan, and that would help kind of alleviate whether you're hitting neighbors' windows, if it's to the left, to the right, center. Basically, you can fix your orientation with playing with those and the tilt to avoid windows and things like that. All right, so in this layout, we have 4 moving heads. So I'm going to import one of BF Light Show's sequences with moving heads onto this, and you'll see how I would go about mapping 8 down to 4. So we can come over here, we could go over to import effects, find the sequence that you want to import. So let's just pick a Halloween one since Halloween's coming up. So if I wanted to do something like Dracula, we come over here, extract the sequence. And then we have the list of effects over here. So we have dimmers, throw that on dimmers, strand 1. And then you have the option, since we have 8 moving heads in that layout, and when only have 4 physical moving heads, you can pick which effects you want to bring over. I typically like to bring 4 and 5. Those are the middle 2. So I would definitely recommend putting those, one on the left, one on the right. So if you're using 6 moving heads, 4 and 5 would go on moving head 3 and 4. In my case, since I only have 4, they'll go on 2 and 3. And then you can pick one of the outer values. So 1, 2, or 3 could go on node 1, 6, 7, or 8 could go on node 4. And then you are going to repeat that process with your pan. So strand 1. And you want to make sure that these match, otherwise the effects are going to look off. And then shutter is basically just drag directly onto the group. Tilt, go ahead and do the same thing. 3, 4. Oops. And depending on your configuration or how it actually looks on your display, you may have to play with it a little bit, but that should get you pretty close if you want to go down from 8 to 4. The one thing that would probably be off is the dimmer. So if we come down here and look at the dimmers, we do have dimmer values on individual moving heads, and you are going to lose the effects on the 4 moving heads that are not here. So what you could do is you could import this again and put them on a different value. You could have ghost channels. You could put them on like 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and then just kind of play with the timing. It's really up to you on how particular you are on the actual moving heads and timings and things like that. So now if we come over and actually try to play it, we can see in the little preview window here, they're moving around and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing for moving head 2, 4, 5, and 7. So in that sequence, we have a lot of effects that kind of cross each other and do kind of a star pattern, and it's still doing that. So that's kind of a quick way to do that. And then, oops. Want to go over one other thing with color and RGB sequences and some of the BF Light Show add-ons. So when you use the color wheel, if you want it to show up in X lights, after you define it in the layout, what you're going to do is actually put the color that you want it to show up as on the moving head in this sequence. So in a minute, when this sequence loads, I'll go ahead and show you what that looks like. I'm going to turn these moving heads off. It looks like we have another question. That time on off is per sequence or by show? George, I think you're asking for the lamp on and off. That is for your show. So you would do a lamp on 5, 10, 15 minutes before your show starts, and then you ignore the lamp on or lamp off, the lamp channel, you just basically ignore it your whole show. So your individual sequences don't have that at all. And then at the end of the night, you're going to run the lamp off sequence, which has the 160 DMX value, and it will turn the lamp off. A few minutes later, you can go ahead and kill the power to them so they're not running all night, because they do have fans in them and you're going to be paying for power for no reason. And then looks like we got another question. When going from 8 to 4, do you recommend select mapping to 2, 4, 5, and 7, or choosing odd and even work as well? It could. I played around with it a lot for the 4th of July show we did. So I mapped all of the sequences we have, all 23 of them that have moving heads, and played around with different configurations. 2, 4, 5, and 7 seem to give me the best results. Your mileage may vary. You can play around with it if you like the effects some of the other ones are doing more than 2 and 7. By all means, you could do 1 and 8. If you want to do 1 through 4, you would basically get half of some of the effects. So we have a lot that cross and kind of do fans and stuff. If you just do 1 through 4, you would have basically half of a fan. So I don't recommend going that route, but if you like that look more, then by all means, you could do that. And then, so let me scroll down in the sequence. So right here is the Barbie girl sequence, and I'll zoom in on this a little bit. So in here, we have color values on the moving head itself. And what that's doing is basically forcing the moving head to become that color. So that is controlling the color wheel, and it is telling your moving head which color it needs to be. So in this case, if I click right here, we have yellow and pink. If I change this to, say, green, it would light up green. And that's what the actual moving head would do. So if you set up the color wheel, it's really easy to set up colors in X-Lights now. Scott added this feature, I think, last year sometime. The only caveat to this is it has to match your color wheel. So if you have green, but I put in, say, like a different shade of green. Okay, so it recognizes that shade. Probably won't recognize this one. So X-Lights is showing that shade of green, but on the actual moving head, if you don't have that shade of green defined, it won't work. So it has to actually match. Even though X-Lights is showing you this color, it won't actually turn to that color if you don't have it defined over here. So just one caveat to be aware of with color. Like I said, color, it's cool here and there. A lot of colors don't show up all the time, so I would use it sparingly. But if you want to put something on a sidewalk or something like that, you can get some cool effects with adding color, and they show up pretty well. So, all right. Does anybody have any other questions? Because that was basically the end of the presentation that I wanted to cover, but want to make sure I left at least 10 minutes or so to answer questions. Feel free to unmute yourself and come up if you have any. Sorry, Tim. No? Okay. Well, thank you everyone that
I actually
showed
have a question. It might be a little bit different. It's more
Sure.
of an issue than
Okay.
it is. So what I was noticing here as I follow along and set this head up, the one thing I noticed is that for me, when I have for the effect, there's the color bar selector where you can indicate, different for the bar, what the color is. That would
Yes.
actually disable my effect.
So I would imagine that in your group settings in the layout, so if you come over to like color dimmers and that type of thing, if you
Right.
go to string property,
Mm-hmm.
do you have that set a single color?
Let me double check. No, I don't.
Set that to single color, because otherwise it will give you all kinds of weird issues. I like it at the beginning of this presentation, I forgot to set that, and it was, strobing and doing all kinds of weird things. 3 and 4 weren't working at all. That makes a big difference on how things will act and respond.
Cool. Thank you.
No problem. Is there a way to adjust for speed change between different types of heads? Yes, there is. So in the actual layout, when you come over here, there is a pan slew limit. Hello? Okay. I got a question in chat from Benson Family Light Show. So is there a way to set or adjust for speed change between different types of heads? That is going to be defined at this pan slew limit degrees per second and tilt slew limit. I have it set at 150, which means it would take 3 seconds to do a full rotation. So it'll do 150 degrees in a second. So I would need 3 seconds to do the 400. I'm sorry. I would need a little over 4 seconds to do that 540, that full rotation, to do a full circle. If I set that faster, set that at say 25, I would need 1 second to do that. So that's how you can adjust for different speed. I have mine set a little bit slower, so that way, even though I have faster heads, some of the other heads on the market should be able to keep up with them. Somebody else was coming up and saying hello. Did you have a question?
Sorry, I was trying to test my microphone.
No problem.
But yeah, I did. So when we do the importing from, say, one of your sequences into our layouts and whatnot, do we have to add all the different groups like you were setting up initially?
I would recommend setting up the groups. It'll make importing easier. You just have to do that once. So you do it in your layout, and then once you have them, you won't have to redo them for every sequence, but all the sequences would come over easier. I know we use the groups at BF Light Shows, RGB Sequences. I believe Pixel Perfect Sequences uses them. I know Tom at Magical Light Shows uses them. So there's quite a few sequencers that do use them, and it would be universal because it's set to your moving head. So it would save you time if you get sequences from any of them.
So any moving head we get, the manual will dictate what settings you need to add for those groupings?
Basically, so let me pull so the ones that I definitely recommend you have are shutter, dimmer, pan, and tilt. Color optional. I wouldn't think you need any of the other ones. You can set them up if you want, like the Gobo, the Frost, Focus, Zoom, all those. Most sequencers aren't using, and Xlights isn't going to show you a good representation of it anyways. So you can set them up. It's not going to hurt anything, but you probably won't use them very often. But the dimmer, pan, shutter, and tilt, you'll use in basically every sequence you get from us and a lot of the other sequencers too.
Awesome. And I do have another question, but I see a
Sure.
few more popping up in chat if you want to go through those first.
Go ahead, and then I'll get to those.
My question kind of really deals with the physical setup configurations. Like, can they be daisy chained and all go to one DMX port on a Falcon, say?
Yes.
Or
So all 4 of these are daisy chained together and they go to one port on my Falcon F16V4.
awesome.
You can do 8. The only thing I wouldn't recommend daisy chaining is power to all of them. You can daisy chain, I have 4 of them on one circuit. If I was running 8, I would split them between 2 circuits in the house, because you have the lamp and then you have the motor, you have fans, and then these are indoor, so I need the domes, which also have fans in them. So times 4, you're adding quite a bit of load to that one circuit. So I would split that between 2 circuits. But
Thank you very much.
no problem.
The DMX fixture is configured so that they will daisy chain correctly. So the first one is channel 1, the second one would have to be set to channel 17,
Yes.
etc. down the chain. That's a setting you have to do in the fixture itself.
Yep. So on the fixture, it will say that, and then you need that to match in exploits and on your controller. That DMX address is represented in the visualizer right here where this number 1 is in the square brackets, and then 17, 33, and 49. If I had 4 more moving heads, you would add 16 to this 49 and so on and so forth until you got to the end of the chain. But you could do all 8 off one serial port of the Falcon without a problem.
And that's kind of what I thought, Kyle, when I saw that image there. Kind of like my regular dumb DMX floods, which are 3 channels. It's 1, then 4, then 7, or so.
Yep.
Just wanted clarification.
Yep. All right. So let's see.
So Kyle, were you going to talk about mapping at all, like remapping? I have 2 sets of heads, and the 2 sets of heads don't match your mapping at all.
Okay.
And one of them is only a 210 tilt, and the other is 270. So I have to do a remap, and I usually end up having to do the offset over on the far right-hand side in order to get the tilt exactly the same.
Okay. Yeah, I can do kind of a brief overview on that. Give me just 1 second. I just want to look at a couple other questions real quick, and then I will see if I can do that. So SSE, another question, I think it's also from you. Pan and tilt orientation on the head setups are for the visualizer only. They don't impact in any way the actual sequencing. That is correct. So the pan and tilt orientation you see in the layout, it is strictly so you can have a good idea of what the moving head looks like. So we have the orientation and the pan and tilt pointed down towards the right, which is what the moving head's doing. So if I'm looking at them, they're pointing down towards the right. If I had this set, say at 0 and it was pointing upwards to the right, and I set a value of 128 on the screen, it would be pointing kind of like this direction. But in real life, it would be pointing up and down. So I would not have a good representation. I would be thinking I'm pointing straight up and down when in actuality, I'm pointing back towards like my neighbor's house. So that's why setting this is important, so you get a good representation of what it would actually look like. Dimmer turns the lamp on and off. No, it does not. What dimmer does, there's a little door inside the moving head. So you have your bulb shining. Best way I can show this is you have your bulb shining. Your dimmer is basically a door that's blocking the light. The light's always on, but the dimmer's in the way. So you basically turn the dimmer on and off, and it will undo and kind of open that door so you can see the light. Dim the dimmer, the lamp not off, so that takes time. I do not have any pics showing how to mount them on the roof. I am planning on, I have the aluminum truss I got from your Pixel store, so I have the trussing. I need to get a roofing company to come out and actually physically install them. For the 4th of July show, I set them on an addition I have, so they were literally just sitting on top of the roof. They weighed about 75 pounds between the fixture and the dome. And the addition is almost flat. So I basically just took a 2x4, put it under the dome, so that way the actual moving head and the dome sat level, and I just kind of ran the show that way. But the rest of my house, it is a very steep pitch, so that wouldn't work. That's why in the videos, if you see any of them, all the moving heads, all 4 of them are in a tiny little configuration on the right side of my house as opposed to spread out. I didn't have the truss in time.
Tom Betgeorge does have a video on his site that you can watch on how to mount it on the roof with the truss system. I don't know if you knew that, Kyle, but
I did not. I've seen the video on Facebook, but I didn't know he had it on his website now. That's helpful. All right. So the color wheel size on Magic Color, I believe it's 11. I believe it's 11, but I'm not 100% on that. All right, so to import, if you need to come over here, so say we need to do some adjustments. So in here, basically what I did is just double clicked on the pan, double clicked on the strand, and that exposed the 4 nodes. Depending on how it's sequenced, you can see in different areas, it's on different groups or different props, basically. But if you have a DMX effect here, actually this sequence isn't a great example to do the channel remapping since they're on the individual nodes as opposed to on the group. So let me go back to Dracula, 1 second. All right, well, we'll do it here anyways. So you'd have to do this times 4. So you'd have to do this for each of the moving heads. But if you come in here, channel 1 is basically representing tilt on moving head 1, and it's set at a value of 70. So 40 is basically pointing straight out at the crowd. 128 is straight up. So that's kind of in the middle. So it should be kind of on like a 45-degree angle towards the crowd. If I needed that to go straight up, say just my moving heads are set up a little bit differently than the sequencer, you could come over to this remap channels and you could do a offset value. And say I did a value of offset -30. What that would do is that would take it from an upwards angle of about 45 and make it pretty much level. So as you can see, I added that offset value of -30. Now I'm at 40. And you could do that as like a bulk edit. If you want to do a bulk edit, if you just kind of drag your mouse and highlight the effects, I found that that's kind of buggy and doesn't work very well. So instead, I would recommend clicking on node 1 or pan, tilt, whatever you're actually trying to copy and change. Come over to select effects, then click remap. Then you can do your offset. You want to make sure that you see this bulk edit though, otherwise it's only going to do the first effect. So to get bulk edit, you just right click on this. And then same thing, -30. And then all of the values through node 1 would get affected. They'd be -30. So I did it twice on effect 1. So I went from 70 to 40 to 10. So if you keep doing it, it's going to keep applying that offset. So just keep that in mind. And then one other thing, if the moving heads, if the effect is on the actual moving head itself, so all right, so say channel 2 is your pan and it's 100 and we'll say 128. So 128 it's pointing away from your house and you want it pointing to the crowd, but on top of being channel 2, my pan is actually channel 10. So I need it to go from channel 2 to channel 10, and I need this to change to 80 to 43. I could remap the channel. I could say channel 2 should be channel 10. So it's taking all the information from channel 2, putting it on channel 10, and then I want to offset it by -86 or 180 degrees. So now what it's doing is it is going to change that. Now channel 10, which is my pan, has a value of 42. So instead of being pointing away from my house, it's pointing towards the house, and it did the remapping for me. So that's one trick that you can use if the sequencer basically did the whole sequence on the moving head itself and your moving head is configured differently. If the sequencer is using the groups like I showed you, then once you transfer it from the sequencer's dimmer to your dimmer group, it will do all that remapping for you. You don't have to do any of that. That's kind of one of the benefits of doing the group method as opposed to on the actual fixture itself. But that is the last thing I wanted to go over. So if anyone else has any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them. But other than that, I think we're just about done. All right, perfect. Well, thank you everyone for coming. I hope you learned something. If you have any questions, run into any issues down the road, feel free to send me a message. I will do my best to do an updated video once Gil releases the new moving head model and effect, and we'll see what the changes bring, and if we need to make a new recommendation or new groups or any of that type of stuff, we'll be sure to put that out. So thanks everyone and have a great night.